We're at war with the virus. It has nothing to do with copays or anything. We just passed a law saying that you do not have to pay for any of this, period.
That's not true. That law has enormous loopholes. It is not necessarily covering treatment for all people.
Nobody will pay for anything having to do with the crisis.
Really an unprecedented debate tonight behind closed doors in a Washington, D.C. TV studio with no live audience. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders making their respective cases to Democratic primary voters. Time to discuss who was the winner and loser with tonight's political panel. Host of the Demiki Show, Demiki Konst, Democratic strategist Kevin Walling, and Fox News contributor Katie Pavich. Good to have all of you with us tonight.
Hey, Shannon.
Okay, so there was a lot of talk about going into this that Joe Biden needed to make an appeal to the Bernie bros, the Sanders diehard voters, to get on board with him, how he'll need them in the general election. The New York Post writing this, the grumbling from Sanders diehards is no idle threat. A whopping 12% of them voted for Trump in 2016, according to an analysis by Cooperative Congressional Election Study. That added up to roughly 216,000 voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Exit polls showed Trump's combined margin of victory in those states was 77,744. Namiki, I remember this. I talk about this all the time. At the DNC, the Bernie bros were so mad at the establishment, at Hillary, at the DNC. They came to tell me, we're not voting for this guy. Either they're staying home or they're voting for Trump. What do you think they do now if Biden's the nominee? Did he make enough of a case to you?
I think Biden has a real situation on his hands. He is barely earning any support from Democratic voters under the age of 50. Bernie Sanders has 70% of support of voters under 50 in the Democratic primary. Now, while the math might look differently, in a controlled primary that is controlled by the Democratic Party, in the election, Biden's going to have a real problem there. Appealing to voters, he's basically called Bernie bros for the last 8 months, and going on stage and just taking all of Bernie's policies suddenly. He flipped his entire record, his entire platform in the last week, with exception of Medicare for all, and that's not what his record says. So, you can't just take Bernie's policies, in a crisis and expect voters to believe in you, especially if you have 40 years of having completely opposite policies and records.
He's got a voting record, so people can go look for themselves. So now he's caught between this criticism that he's not progressive enough to bring on the people from Bernie, and he also has now adopted one of the Warren plans as well tonight. Yeah. But here is what the New York Magazine says. The headline, Joe Biden's platform is more progressive than you think. Biden mostly casts himself as a return to normalcy, but what he is promising as well is a continuation of the liberal tradition of Roosevelt, Johnson, and Obama. So, Katie, is he too progressive or not progressive enough? I don't know.
Look, Bernie Sanders, Vice President Joe Biden has a much bigger problem than supporters of Bernie Sanders going into a general election. The math is going to be him as the nominee. Tonight, he proved once again, one-on-one with Bernie Sanders, that he is not a moderate. He is an extremist. He believes in gun confiscation. Beto O'Rourke has appointed the gun control czar by him 2 weeks ago, proves that. He said tonight that he wants a ban on new fracking. He said he wants a ban on all oil drilling. That is an extreme position. He's not going to be able to turn into votes in places like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and even Wisconsin. He talked about tonight how he doesn't support the Hyde Amendment anymore, which means he is for taxpayer-funded abortion. These are extremist views, not for Bernie Sanders voters, but for the rest of the country at every single level. And that is where he's going to have to contend. The Trump campaign tonight has a lot to work with when it comes to general election, because Joe Biden is either going to have to change his position again and lie about what he's been saying throughout this Democratic primary, or he's going to be too far left for the rest of the country.
Well, and Kevin, that was the number one criticism I saw on Twitter tonight, although that is not where we get all our information. But real-time reaction to the debate, people were taking snippets of what the former vice president said tonight and then pulling up his voting record over the last 30, 40 years, or clips of him saying the exact opposite. So, Kevin, what does he do with that and this accusation that he's just moving around to where he thinks he needs to be to get the votes he needs to get to the next challenge?
Yeah, Shannon, I think the vice president had a really strong night tonight on the debate stage. All kind of independent journalists have said that he was a winner coming out of tonight's debate. I think he is going to skirt that line somewhere in the middle. He's not an extremist. The American people know he's not an extremist, to Katie's point. But he charted a course that is appealing to the majority of Americans in this country. And he actually looked presidential when dealing about this crisis that the American people are facing with this pandemic. He was calm, collected, as he was in his news conference 3 days ago. Many of those ideas were adopted by the president just a day later in terms of responding to this virus. But he looked presidential on that debate stage. I don't think he's going to have any problem bringing both the Bernie camp back and disaffected Trump voters come November.
Let me just translate this real quickly, though, because when Joe Biden says that he no longer wants any kind of oil drilling, that it translates into getting rid of thousands of jobs that people depend on, union voters.
They can be re-educated. Those folks can be re-educated for jobs of the future.
Okay, that's what Hillary Clinton said, and she lost by a significant margin.
Well, Nimiki, let me ask you this. I'm going to put up the Real Clear Politics national average as it stands right now for the Democratic primary. Now, this is national. We know state by state is very different, and that matters when you're putting together the math. But with the former vice president, by this estimate, 22 points ahead of the senator, why, Nomiki, does he have a case for staying in at this point?
Well, don't forget, just 14 days ago, within 3 days, you had Joe Biden in 4th and 5th place in some states with very little money on hand to winning the South Carolina primary, which he was expected to win, and all the establishment support, which he's in line with, backing him, and then it flipped. Listen, half of primary voters have not voted yet, and possibly won't be for a while due to this pandemic. I mean, what we saw on stage here today was Bernie Sanders reiterating his plans, which would have possibly, especially, Washington Post said today that unlike the United States, where the top health official told Congress that the rollout in testing was failing, in single-payer countries, they were able to get testing to folks faster, but not in the United States. We've not been able to do so because of Joe Biden's incrementalism. He's worried about how you're going to pay for Medicare for all. Ask the banks who just got a massive boost and did during his bailout just 12 years ago. Working people who don't know what they're going to do to be able to pay their rents, to be able to get to work, to pay for their health care, to pay for these tests, to pay for the treatment, to pay for their pharmaceuticals down the line. It's not just the crisis of this moment. It's the crisis that comes after this moment. Wow. And Joe Biden's policies and record, and definitely Donald Trump's, are not preparing us for that. And that is what I think the American people will see today, is that Bernie Sanders has been right on these issues, and he has the right plans moving forward.
All right, quick final word, Katie.
Look, on the single-payer argument, the reason why we were unable to get the testing that we needed is because there's too much regulation with the way that the CDC and the FDA pushed forward medical supplies in this country. That regulation was then taken off, and now we're hopefully going to get the testing that we need. The single-payer system is full of more bureaucracy. The reason why testing has been slow is a result of bureaucracy in America. And a single-payer system, as Joe Biden pointed out tonight, by the way, in Italy, is failing. So I don't think we need to go down the Bernie Sanders path of completely taping up the system.
We got to leave it there. We're going into overtime. Got to leave it there. Nomiki, Kevin, and Katie, thank you all.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.